Death at Devil's Bridge, Chapter 5. Poor fellow, he was an untoward fate. Lord Byron, Don Juan. I'm sorry to trouble you with this request, Charles, Constable Edward Lakin said apologetically, but the villagers are quite up in arms, and the poor fellow died outside your gate. I quite understand, Ned, Charles said, regarding his old friend with a sober affection. The servants here are unhappy as well. It was an unfortunate occurrence. Charles and the constable had known one another as boys in neighbouring East Bergholtz across the River Stour, where Charles had come to holiday with his aunt and uncle. The two had ranged up and down the Stour, climbing across the lochs, snaring birds, rafting on Jack's Bay. Now, Lakin was the local constable, and Charles had had occasion to renew their friendship over the course of one or two recent criminal investigations. I don't know that there is anything to be done, since the man apparently died of natural causes, Lakin said, but it might quiet wagging tongues if I could speak with your servants. By all means, Charles said. Speak with whomever you please, although I fear you will hear only rumour. The death of old Jessup, a tenant of nearby Thornton Grange, had been on the servants' lips since breakfast, a dozen different versions of it. It is not true, then, I hope it is not, that the man was struck and killed by Marston's Daimler. Charles had heard that version from Thompson, the gardener, this morning, although he had not believed it. Lakin shook his head. There were no marks on the victim's body, but Dr. Bassett will conduct an autopsy. Old Jessup was fond of his pint or two, and Bassett suspected apoplexy. But that aside, another of the village residents reported that she was nearly run down by a motor car a few minutes before she discovered Jessup's body beside the road. That would have been a few minutes before 8, yelled Charles. Lord Marston was here last night. Charles frowned. He and his sister and their house guest arrived just before 8 by motor car. I cannot think, however, that they could have struck someone and concealed that fact for an entire evening. If they were involved, it must have been unwittingly. Young Jessup, the old man's son, is insisting that the Daimler was involved. He said that he himself saw the car and that it was driven by Marston's house guest. Quite recklessly, he says. That would be Charlie Rolls, Charles said. The Honourable Charles Stuart Rolls. Thank you, Edward said, and made a quick note. Young Jessup saw the car travelling at a high rate of speed and without a walking attendant, and spewing great clouds of dust, he said, and making an intolerable noise. He paused. He says he wanted the driver charged. With what? Charles asked. Breaking a law that the Parliament has already repealed? The old law imposed a speed limit of 4 miles an hour in open country and required that a man, wearing a hat with a red band marked locomotive attendant, should walk 20 yards in front of any self-propelled vehicle. Under the new law, the attendant was no longer required, and the limit had been raised to 12 miles an hour. The old law has been repealed indeed, Lakin said, and although the new statute does not go into effect for 30 days or so, I doubt very much that the magistrate would impose a fine. Even under the old law, the maximum penalty is £10 for breaching the speed limit and an additional £10 for failing to provide an attendant. He sighed, but these are not the charges young Jessup had in mind. Charles raised his eyebrows. What then does he have in mind? Ned. He wants the driver charged with murder, Lakin said. Murder! Bradford Marston rose from his chair so abrupt that it fell over backwards. That is patently ridiculous, man. Why, we never laid eyes on the poor fellow. We certainly did not strike him. I agree that making such a charge appears irresponsible, Edward Lakin said quietly. At least at the moment, and I doubt that a coroner's journey would bring a true bill on it. I tell you because that is the way feeling is running in the village with regard to your motor vehicle, and I thought you should like to know. Yes, of course, Bradford muttered, feeling that he wanted to know nothing of the sort. But the villagers must be made to understand. He pressed his lips together. Do you know yet how the old man died? Dr. Bassett believes he may have suffered an apoplectic stroke. If such is the case, his son, I understand, intends to assert that it was occasioned by a great fear, a fear of being run down by your motor car. He seems to hope for a verdict of manslaughter through the reckless operation of a speeding vehicle. The constable paused. I understand that the Daimler was driven by your house guest, the Honourable Charles Rolls. Bradford nodded nominally. What if his father, already furious about the exhibit, should hear of this latest affair and come storming home? Bradford was over 30, but he still had a healthy fear of the old man's anger, especially since the senior Lord Marston controlled the family purse. Then I should like to speak with Mr. Rhodes, the constable said. Bradford stood. And I believe you will find him with my sister in the conservatory. He rang a bell. Peters will show you the way. Thank you, the constable said. I trust you will be prepared to answer the coroner's summons, should you receive it, Lord Bradford. The inquest will take place early next week. Of course, Bradford said. When the constable had gone, he sank back into his chair, trying to think what to do. Murder, Sally Munby said to Bess Gurdon, thumping her churn with great energy. I'll say it was murder. Poor old Jessup, mean as he was to his Tildy, didn't deserve to be run down like a dog. Next you know it'll be me, or you. But you weren't run down, objected Sally's daughter, Martha, who was peeling potatoes for the noon meal. What a mark on the old man. Well, then he's scared to death, Sally said, with an air of having the last word. 'Tis all one to him now, poor fellow. Bess Gurdon sighed heavily. 'Twas almost me, she said, recalling the event with shudderish thrill. If I hadn't drove into that ditch. Lord, Bess, Sally said, you must have been some frightened. That motor car bearing out of the dark with the eyes like a dragon, Martha prompted helpfully. Like a great mad dragon, breathed Sally. And a roar like a steam locomotive, Bess said. A runaway steam locomotive barreling down the tracks. Sally rolled her eyes and thumped her churn again. Lord, you're a brave woman, Bess, a brave woman indeed. If you hadn't dove into that ditch, you'd been murdered too. The thumping paused, and Sally's voice took a different tone. By the by, Bess, have you seen the Widow Jessup's new black bonnet with all the ribbons? Bess acknowledged that she had. Very strange, Sally mused, shaking her head. Very strange indeed. It came from Colchester, I heard, and cost at least a guinea. Don't you think that's strange? Why, Tildy Jessup had a new bonnet since she were a bride, and that was more than 20 years ago. What I want to know, she added in a conspiratorial tone, is where that guinea come from. What do you think, eh? Where'd you get it? The conversation having now shifted from her own narrow miss to the widow's new bonnet, Bess lost interest. She took a leave and walked up High Street toward the Rushton House, which serves as the village post office. Along the way, she received the best wishes of several acquaintances who, like Sally Munby, expressed their pleasure to see her among the living. Crazy Mick, sweeping the steps in front of the Marlborough Head, called out to her in a voice like a grating mill wheel. Look here, alive, Bess Gurdon, not murdered like old Jessup, poor fella. And Rachel Elam, coming out of the apothecary's shop with a bag on her arm, remarked with the dark on the imminent danger in which they all stood at this very moment, with horseless carriages and steam lorries snorting like wild devils down High Street, charging into the very houses, mothering innocent women and children in their sleep. And when Bess reached the steps of the post office, she encountered another and far grander personage, Squire Thornton, who also had views upon the subject. Mistress Gurdon, is it not? The squire asked. He was a tall, lean man with greying hair and thick grey eyebrows. His eyes were sharp and clear, and his nose straight, but a mean mouth and thin lips robbed these features of their otherwise nobility. Bess, astonished to be greeted by such a man, dropped a faltering curtsy. Good morning, squire, she croaked. The squires of Thornton were the first commoners of the district, and the estate of Thornton Grange had been mainstay of the parish of Dedham for several hundreds of years. In a time when the Marston baronets had found it necessary to sell outlying parcels of land in order to protect the central holdings of the Marston estate, Thornton Grange remained intact and well managed, and the squires, Thornton, though outgoing Tories who had passed the land holdings from father to son, from uncle to nephew, without subtracting so much as an acre, gained much respect thereby. This respect had been enlarged over recent generations by the ascendancy of the Thornton stables, which commanded the esteem of knowledgeable men beyond the bounds of the district. But respect did not equal affection, and the Thorntons in their various generations had never been greatly loved in the parish. To a man they had been unyielding and hard, just only by the lights of their own justice, prone to having their own way and rising to sudden and impetuous ire when thwarted. Yet it must be said that they were not ungenerous, for they did their part and more in the parish charity, and supported their tenants in times of difficulty. And when they chose, they could be considerate and thoughtful. At this moment, it seemed, Squire Roger Thornton so chose. "I understand that you very nearly suffered an injury in a motor car accident, Mistress Girton." "Aye, sir, that I did, sir," Bess replied earnestly. "'Twas a horrible thing, sir, the fright of my life." "I can well imagine. The motor car is a dangerous invention." The squire's tone was grave and solicitous. "The incident occurred on the same road where old Jessup lost his life, the poor fellow." "Oh, yes, sir, very near, sir. To tell the truth, I was the one who found him dead just after." "You reported to the constable that you were nearly run down." Bess lifted her chin. "Yes, sir, and so I would say to anybody who asked." The squire's thin lips shaped themselves into a smile. "Very good," he said. He inclined his head, opened the door, and passed into the post office, where Bess heard him inquire as to the feasibility of sending a telegram to Nice. Then he turned and left again, but not before nodding once more to Bess, who returned the nod with another curtsy. With respect to automobiles, the postmaster, Mr. Rushton, took a more judicious but no less prejudicial point of view. "The lane's no longer safe for us," he pronounced, frowning down his long nose as he moistured the stamp and placed it precisely in the corner of the envelope that Bess was sending to a cousin in Ipswich. "I wonder at Lord Christopher, permitting his son to own one, indeed I do." And with that he took Bess's penny and deposited her letter in the canvas mail sack, which would later be carted to Colchester in time for the night mail train to Ipswich. "Poor Jessup," he added sadly. "Poor old fellow." Mr. Rushton was a fuzzy little man with an exaggerated sense of his own importance. He kept the post office, which occupied the small front parlour of the Rushton home, with punctilious care, making sure that Mrs. Rushton inserted each piece of mail into the proper pigeonhole of the oaken cupboard, marked A to Z with the gleaming gold plates. But Mr. Rushton permitted no one but himself to dispense the penny and halfpenny stamps from the official cardboard-leaved book, and no one else was allowed to count out the change, or even to open the cash drawer with its 3 wooden bowls for gold, silver, and copper. It was also, and only, Mr. Rushton who sent and received telegrams, for he had passed the post office examination in Morse code. With this grasp of technology, he was respectfully regarded as the most up-to-the-minute person in the village, only one in constant contact with the developing events in the outer world. It was therefore quite something, Bess felt, to see him shake his head and hear him say that motor cars were dangerous inventions and not to be trusted. And while Bess believed that Mr. Rushton put too fine a point on most things, she fully agreed with him, and with Rachel Elam and Crazy Mick and Sally Monby and Squire Thornton, with regard to the dangers of motor cars. What if, instead of herself alone, there had been school children in the narrow lane, or Dr. Bassett and his fat grey pony, or the vicar bobbling along on his safety bicycle, or the baker's boy with a load of loaves? They could all have been killed by the rampaging motor car, and what then would have been the charge? Hardly murder, but mayhem, certainly massacre even. Bess could scarcely wait until the day of the coroner's inquest, when Harry Hodson would call her to testify, and she fell to wondering how she might add a bit of lace to her best dress to make it fit for such a momentous event. In fact, she was so intent upon this addition to her wardrobe that she almost stepped out in the lane in front of young Jessup, who was driving a shiny new gig. Coroner Harry Hodson was a great burly bear of a man who had for some years served as the Queen's coroner in the Royal District encompassing Dedham and a dozen other small villages. He had been a country physician in the earlier parts of his career, but had married a widow of substantial means and promptly retired. Harry enjoyed his office and competently upheld the oath that he had taken when he assumed it. "I will diligently and truly do everything pertaining to my office after the best of my power, for the doing of right and for the good of the inhabitants within the district." But he was a peaceful man at heart, and much preferred having nothing particular to do after breakfast and lunch. On the afternoon of old Jessup's funeral, Coroner Hodson met with Dr. Braxton Bassett, Constable Edward Lakin, and Sir Charles Sheridan at the square deal table in Dr. Bassett's consulting room at the rear of Mr. Crosby's apothecary shop. Around them were the accoutrements of a village doctor, a glass-fronted case of leather-bound medical books, a grinning skull upon the window-sill, a table of chrome-plated surgical implements partially covered with a folded white cloth, a small stove topped with a steaming kettle. It was a convenient room, one oaken door leading to Mr. Crosby's apothecary, the other to Dr. Bassett's surgery, and all that was needed was close at hand. When all four men were settled in their chairs, teacups and biscuit plates before them, the coroner turned to Dr. Bassett and, in formal tone, asked for his opinion in the matter of old Jessop's death. The doctor, a man of middle age, with sharp, clear eyes and regular features, cleared his throat and announced that it was his belief that old Jessop had suffered an apoplectic stroke. It is scarcely surprising, he added, since the man was much given to drink. Had he died at the Lamb, where he spent so much time, or in his garden, or his bed, where there would be no mystery about his death, poor fellow, and no commotion. Harry Hodson shifted his bulk in his chair. But he died in the vicinity of a motor car, he said, tenting his fingers under his chin, an untoward event. I have examined the motor car and found no damage consistent with its striking a pedestrian, Edward Lakin said. I have also questioned the driver, the lady passenger, and Lord Bradford, the owner. All three seemed genuinely surprised to learn of the incident. I do not believe they saw the old man. They were guests at Bishop's Keep that evening, offered Sir Charles. If they had been involved in any way with a fatality, I am sure they would have spoken of it. In fact, I dare say we would have spoken of nothing else. Harry Hodson drained his cup. They did not see Bess Girton either, but she claims to have been nearly run down by the vehicle shortly before she discovered old Jessop's body. That's neither here nor there, said the doctor, getting up to fetch the kettle. There was not a mark on him, Harry. Jessop died of a stroke, and that is all there is to it. Harry Hodson suppressed a belch. It would be, Brax, he said sourly, thinking of the work required to collect and impanel a jury, if it were not for the dead man's son. Yes, said the constable, he has made a deal of noise. He sighed. The villagers, even those who did not particularly like his father, are greatly upset about the old man's death. Most believe that if the motor car did not strike the old man, then it certainly frightened him to death. While the doctor filled his cup, the coroner turned to Sir Charles. You have looked into the matter with the constable, I take it. What do you think? Harry had occasion to call Sir Charles to testify in an inquest into the death of a constable and had high regard for his opinion. I think, Sir Charles said gravely, that it is a great pity, both the old fellow's death and the villagers' reaction to it, but I do not think that anyone is responsible under the law. You're suggesting that there might be some sort of other responsibility, the doctor asked, sitting down once again with an expression of actual interest. We do not understand the impact of the changes that are occurring in these modern times, Sir Charles said, and neither, for that matter, does the law. But that, as you say, is neither here nor there. The fact is that the old man died of natural causes, and there are no eyewitnesses or physical evidence that would suggest either a motoring accident or even foul play. If Harry had had a gavel, he would have struck it smartly on the table and declared the meeting adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen, he said. I see no need for further consideration of this matter. I shall exhort young Jessop to not make unfounded allegations. The doctor chuckled. Better you than me, Harry, old chap. I'm afraid your work is cut out for you, the way he's roaring around. He took the lid off a tin canister. Would anyone like another biscuit? But if the coroner had expected the victim's son, a dark-complected man in his early 20s, with dark hair and flashing eyes, to resist exhortation, he was a good deal surprised. Young Jessop heard the doctor's opinion, the constable's report, the coroner's conclusion, and nodded his head slowly. You agree, then, that there is no need to convene an inquest, the coroner said, much relieved. Young Jessop nodded again briskly this time, and the business was thereby concluded. There would be no inquest, no jury, and no allegations of murder. Which was not, of course, the end of the matter, for what Coroner Hodson and the others could not know, and would not discover for some days to come, was that young Jessop's agreement to a finding of death by natural causes had been encouraged, some might have even said it was purchased, by the payment to his mother of a substantial sum of money. Who paid this money, and what the motive might be, only young Jessop would be able to tell. But when Harry Hodson bade the boy a cordial goodbye and congratulated himself upon bringing this disagreeable affair to such an agreeable conclusion, he was deceived. There was more to come. Much more.